Should you buy the Sony FX3 still in 2024? I know what you're thinking, it's another review of the internet's most talked about cameras, but stay with me. I do believe I've got a unique perspective to offer on whether or not you should buy this bloody expensive bit of kit. So I spent the last 18 months working as a news camera operator in London. For the first 6 months of that I was using a big traditional P2 camera, but for the last 12 months I've been using the Sony FX3. Most of my work involves shooting and editing news packages to a same-day deadline, where I've only got one chance to get the shots and I'm often making things up as I go along. It's a super stressful job, but it's one that I enjoy and a lot of people in this profession find pretty addictive. I wanted to talk about how switching to this camera completely transformed my workflow, and create a review specific to the problems and tasks that I encounter on a day-to-day basis. The hope is you'll be able to apply this to your own filmmaking and in turn decide whether or not the Sony FX3 is the right kit for you. And to keep this as relevant as possible, everything that you see in this film will have been shot by the Sony FX3. You couldn't review a camera without first talking about image quality. Whether you're shooting for news, documentary, or just little homemade vlogs, you want your stuff to look good. And I can honestly say with the Sony FX3, you get a really nice looking image. You can shoot 10-bit 4K up to 120 frames per second. That's 64 times the colour information you get with 8-bit, which is pretty mad for a camera this size. It's that colour depth that really makes the images from the camera pop, and this is noticeable even when you're shooting in HD, the deliverable for news, and it looks great when you're shooting in 4K too, obviously. The camera's full frame 12 megapixel sensor also contributes to a lovely looking image, and alongside dual native ISO, it makes it an absolute beast in low light. This is actually one of the main reasons I bought the FX3, and it really doesn't disappoint. You can really push the boundaries in some really dark shooting conditions and get some impressive footage with little to no grain. Another bonus to this beast of a camera is having 15 stops of dynamic range when shooting in S-Log3. You're able to capture a really wide range of light, so less burnout skies, less crushed blacks, but it also just makes the camera so much more easy to use. Because you're able to push the brightest parts of the image further, I found myself relying less on artificial lights to balance contrast, and this in turn has sped up my workflow because I'm carrying less stuff and I'm spending less time setting up my interviews. Being able to work at a fast pace is so incredibly important in my profession, where you could be interviewing a politician, for example, who's only got 30 seconds of time, so you just need to get the job done. A major selling point to the FX3 is just how small it is in comparison to other broadcast cameras, and a lot of people in my industry have made the switch because lighter kit equals less injuries. It's actually kind of scary how much of the older guys seem to have back and shoulder issues to the point where they're no longer able to work, and I'm keen as a 29-year-old not to go down the same road. Related to this, you are just simply more mobile with smaller and lighter kit, and this really is a superpower in a breaking news situation, for example, where you just need to quickly get into the scene and hoover up the shots. I found this to be useful when filming in big protests, for example, being able to more easily weave in and out of crowds. And also things like press statements, where you just need to really quickly get to the location and get the best possible position for the broadcast. I've found the increased mobility I've gained from using the FX3 has really ramped up the speed and efficiency of my shooting, which is really important. When you've got a compact setup that's not permanently fixed to your shoulder, you can move around more freely, get high, get low, get a larger range of shots within the same fixed amount of time. On top of this, the smaller size of the FX3 means it's compatible with things like gimbals and sliders, so you're able to increase your range of shots that way as well. Of course, packing such a highly spec'd cinema camera into such a small body does have its downsides. For example, the FX3 doesn't have its own built-in variable ND, and this is really annoying. If you want to use this camera properly, you have to retrofit an ND to it, which does come at its own cost, but they can also just be a little bit clunky. The solution I've come up with is this Tilt Mirage matte box. It's quite a nice product, but it's not ideal. It's annoying when you want to change the lens, but it's the best thing that I've managed to come up with. One of the things that's come on massively with this generation of cameras is autofocus, and until buying the FX3, I've never actually owned a camera with autofocus that's good enough to use. In particular with the touchscreen, you can literally just click on the thing or the face you want to focus on, and in less than a second it's razor sharp and locked on. This is such a great feature that I use it honestly around 95% of the time. Where it's really up my game is when I'm trying to shoot dynamic shots with quite a lot of movement, for example when mounted onto a gimbal or holding the camera close to the floor. Having autofocus takes away one quite big worry and allows me to concentrate on other things such as shot composition.
The one exception to it working great is when you're filming in big crowds. It can sometimes get a bit confused as to which person or face to focus on, which can be problematic. But I don't think this is the end of the world because you can always just turn it off and focus manually.
A feature which separates this camera from the Sony a7S is the included audio top handle, and there are many things to like about it.
Because it's XLR, you're able to use all the microphones you already owned with a more traditional camera, and the little dials on the side allow you to adjust your levels really easily while recording. The top handle structure itself is also really handy because you've got a low center of gravity. You can use it to get these really nice smooth low down shots such as following feet, but it's also just a really nice thing to grab onto when lifting the camera up to transport it around. One thing I will say though is don't use this feature as a reason to buy this camera over the a7S, because for an overall very similar combined cost you can purchase a very similar solution.
The final thing I'm going to mention is the thing that bugs me most about this camera, and that is the lack of viewfinder. When I bought the FX3, this is something I didn't think would bother me at all, but the more I use the camera, the more I miss having one.
Now that's not to say the screen on the FX3 isn't good, it actually is. It's nice, it's bright, it flips right around, and for someone like me with good eyesight you can easily use it within most conditions. But when shooting in harsh sunlight for example, I find myself sometimes not always having a solid idea of the image I'm actually shooting. And it's in these moments where I really wish I could just put my eye to an EVF to double check my shot. You can of course use zebra and peaking to dial everything in, but it would just be nice to have the option.
I'd like to see something come to market that solves this issue in the future, for example an EVF that you could retrofit to the camera, but so far I've not managed to find a solution that I think would work well for me. I was actually meant to finish this edit a long time ago, but life got in the way. But that does mean that I've now been using the Sony FX3 for over 18 months now. And honestly, my conclusion is pretty much the same. And it's that I'd recommend it to anyone as long as not having an EVF is definitely not an issue to you. Otherwise, I would go for something like the A7S, which is pretty much exactly the same camera. At the time when I bought this camera, it was a big deal. It was a lot of money for me, but I really don't regret kind of pulling the trigger on it. It's really shaped the way that I've been shooting this last year and a half, and it's really changed the course of my career, quite honestly. My main goal was to create a more sort of practical review on this camera within the context of news, and I really do hope that my thoughts and experiences help you at least come a little bit closer to making that decision, because I really know it's a hard one. But anyway, the reason I'm finishing this review on the side of a mountain is because everything for me is very different. I've actually quit my job, I've left London. The plan is to keep doing news but more on a freelance basis, and use the rest of my time to explore other creative avenues such as making films like this, but also documentaries. YouTube is something that I've wanted to do for a while, so I'm really glad that I finally just put something out there. It was a lot of effort to make this video, but if you're interested in following me on this journey, I want to keep making videos like this one, but also behind the scenes of freelancing and maybe little silly adventures. Anyway, you've obviously made it all the way through to the end, so thanks for watching the whole way through. I really hope to see you on the next one.